Leadership, a simple concept that moves the world, writes history, and drives the lives of millions of people around the world. This is a story that celebrates our leadership and makes us proud of who we are. Today, Latino Leaders Magazine crosses the path of the same leaders we've been interviewing for more than 18 years. Making all of us that work at Latino Leaders Magazine proud of our past and excited about our future. Latino Leaders Magazine is confident that we will continue to inspire the leaders that will write the future pages of our history. We have witnessed the enormous potential and value of Latino leaders. Now, Latino Leaders Magazine wants to continue to serve them by connecting these leaders and thus inspiring the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host and publisher of Latino Leaders Magazine, Mr. Jorge Ferraiz.
Hello, I'm Jorge Ferraiz, publisher of Latino Leaders Magazine, and it is my great privilege to welcome you to the 13th annual San Francisco Maestro Awards. This magnificent city by the bay has brought to us in past years many fantastic and outstanding stories of leadership. We've been inspired by the dynamism and the energy that emerges from this great community in the West Coast. Tonight will be no exception. We have 4 fantastic stories of leaders that are very inspiring. I want to thank our sponsor, Southwest Airlines, because they have been supporting this ceremony of awards from its inception. So with that, I want to welcome you again to the 13th annual Maestro Awards in San Francisco.
Jorge, thank you for bringing us together this evening. You and your team connect leaders and inspire others through your publications and events. And to this year's award recipients, congratulations! Tonight, we celebrate you, your service to our communities, and your many accomplishments. I'm Laura Nieto, and I serve as the Director of Community Outreach at Southwest Airlines. At Southwest, we believe in loving people, building resilience, and living responsibly. We do that by partnering with organizations across the country to drive economic, environmental, and social impact. Through our longstanding partnership with Latino Leaders Magazine, we've been able to see firsthand how the power of celebrating Latino success stories can inspire the next generation of leaders. Tonight, I'm honored to recognize Mr. Antonio Villaraigosa, who is best known for his career as a prominent policymaker and a respected voice in American politics. From 1994 through 2000, Mr. Villaraigosa served in the California State Assembly as Democratic Whip, Majority Leader, and Speaker of the Assembly. He then served as a member of the Los Angeles City Council from 2003 to 2005, followed by 2 terms as the 41st Mayor of the City of Los Angeles. Mr. Villaraigosa was a member of President Obama's Transition Economic Advisory Board. He was the 2012 Chairman of the Democratic National Convention and President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. He currently serves as partner and co-chair of Actum, where he focuses on strategic and crisis communication consulting to senior executives in both the public and private sector. In academia, his accomplishments are many, including serving as a fellow at Harvard University and as a professor of public policy at the University of Southern California. On behalf of our 55,000 Southwest Airlines employees, it is my privilege to present the Maestro Award for Leadership to Mr. Antonio Villaraigosa. Congratulations.
The Maestro Award for Leadership in San Francisco 2022 is going to be presented to Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of Los Angeles, the largest city in the US and the first Latino mayor in recent history, a brilliant politician, a great advocate for the community. So congratulations, and join me for a conversation with him.
Well, let me just say thank you, and what an honor it is to be acknowledged and recognized by this organization. I have, my entire life, since I was 15 years old, been involved in my community. At 15, I helped to start the Black Student Union at Cathedral High School. A few months later, we started the United Mexican American Students. I led the walkouts at my high school, got kicked out, went to a public high school, and I've always said it was a Catholic school that gave me a foundation, but a public school that gave me a second chance. I'd grown up on the east side of Los Angeles in Bow Heights and City Terrace. Grew up in a home of domestic violence and alcoholism, and I think that always had an impact on me. I was a peleonero, fought a lot, but I also stood up against injustice, against things that I thought were wrong. In the 9th grade, I was the student council. In the 10th grade, wasn't, but I was doing more of, as I said, the Black Student Union, United Mexican American Students. After that, I didn't run for anything. I was president of the ACLU of Southern California, but hadn't really run for much and wasn't really interested in electoral politics. It wasn't until the 80s in the Jackson campaign, Jesse Jackson's campaign, that started getting involved in presidential elections. And after that, involved in electoral politics. I worked on Gloria Molina's campaign for city council and supervisor. I worked for Mike Hernandez's campaign for city council, Javier Becerra's campaign for state assembly and Congress, and for Lucille Roybal Allard's campaign for state assembly and Congress. And so after a while, folks kept on saying, you ought to run. I love that you're supporting these people, but I think you ought to run. And after a while, I decided that I would, and ran in 1994, as I mentioned, for the State Assembly, and had virtually all of Sacramento against my candidacy. But we put together a great ground operation, had more than 1,000 volunteers, and we won. And 3 weeks after I first got to Sacramento, I was made majority whip under Willie Brown. 2 years later, majority leader and Speaker of the Assembly in my 3rd year. And I've often said, very fortunate, because I had a lot of great people around me, and ran for mayor when I think about 9% of the city knew me, 76% of the city knew my opponent, and very fortunate that a year later I beat him in the primary, lost in the runoff around a campaign that created a climate of fear around breaking this glass ceiling. What would it mean for a Mexican to be mayor of Los Angeles? And what I said from the beginning was, I want to be a mayor for everybody. I want to bring our city together so that we could take on the challenges. So, lost that race, ran for city council 2 years later, being an incumbent in the primary, the only incumbent, as I understand, to have lost in a primary in LA history. And then 2 years later, I ran against the guy that beat me the first time, and was fortunate enough to win the second time. You know what I've always said, I was the second Latino speaker in modern history, the first Latino mayor in more than 133 years. And what I've said to people, I got there on the shoulders of others. I got there because there was a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act that opened up the country to me. I got there on the shoulders of people like Ed Roybal, people like Esteban Torres, Gloria Molina, Richard Alatorre, Art Torres. I got there on the shoulder of people that have struggled to open up our democracy to a broader group of people. I've often said, if I had grown up in another era, I wouldn't have gotten elected. And the first time I ran, I think there was some trepidation about what it meant. And it was interesting because from the beginning, I argued, I want to bring this city together. And we did polling and focus groups. And the polling and focus groups, as one of my consultants said, The city doesn't want to come together, and they certainly don't want to come together around a Mexican. And I said, well, that's fine. I'm gonna say and do that anyway. By the time I left and lost the race, the people who liked me said, I think he'll bring the city together. And I believe I won the second time because of that, because I understood that Tom Bradley came before me, and that, like Tom Bradley and Ed Roybal, I needed to bring people together. I needed to, to argue that, a great city has to be a city where we're growing together, and that means we have to bring people together to take on the challenges. And so, I tell you this, if I had any success, it's because I never forgot where I came from. I've always believed that God put me on this earth to serve, and that I needed to fight for what I believed in. I believe that, since I was 15 years old, I've been involved. I'm never gonna not be involved. Someone just said the other day, said retired mayor. I'm not retired. I intend to work till my last dying breath, and I intend to be involved. I intend to speak out. I want to spend as much as my time as I can fighting for the little guy, fighting for the voiceless, standing up and saying, as President Obama said so many times, that our struggle is a struggle to make the Founding Fathers' words that all men are created and equal. Of course, they weren't talking about all men, they were talking about white men with property, not blacks, not women, not Latinos, not Native Americans. I want to do what I can to create that more perfect union. I believe in this country. My mother raised us to be proud Americans, to be grateful to the country for what we've been given. My mom also taught us to be proud of who we are and where we came from. And I believe that we need to do a better job at integrating more people and giving them a real shot at that dream. So if I have a bucket list, I want to go out fighting for those people.
The Maestro Award in San Francisco 2022 in the category of Professional Achievement is being presented to Helen Torres. She is the president and CEO of HOPE, Hispanas Organized for Political Equity. She has been the soul of this organization for many, many years. And also, she's a fierce advocate and a role model for all of those who want to pursue a public career. Join me to see the conversation we had with her.
I was raised with a very strong work ethic. And so the first time I ever did something just for me, I can't remember. It was always for the family, right? Even when we lived in Detroit, if it was my sister and I carrying groceries for our neighbors and getting that nickel and then putting it in the jar because that money went to the family, right? Or my sister would babysit because she was older than me, and that money went into the jar. So there was always this sense of community, and my mother and my sister and I, for the longest time, were like these three musketeers. When we moved to the suburbs, that's where I started kind of sensing, obviously I was becoming a teenager, and I think everybody has very interesting teenage years. But I started babysitting. I got my first job right at 16, waitressing. And I think that was a turning point because my mother wanted to teach us how to be very responsible. And she said, as soon as you start making enough money, you've got to start paying for your clothes and start savings. She took me to the bank right away to open up a savings account. So I think at that time I inherited the family station wagon where it didn't even have a radio or air conditioning. It just had a heater but I was the happiest person as can be. And it was, my father had the station wagon first, then it went to my sister, and then I got it. And I was just thrilled, right? So I think in my teenage years, I started getting a sense of individuality, but it was always coupled with responsibility. And my parents did a very good job of always reminding us where we came from, who we were from, and just having always a love for the beautiful island of Puerto Rico and standing really proud for being Latino. I always had this image of traveling the world and studying various different, more like a sociologist of some sort, right? Just studying how people come together in urban settings, how they support each other or don't support each other. I actually spent some time in Guadalajara for one of my projects, studying the transportation system and how people communicated about transportation. So I thought I was going to go on and become either, I thought I was going to be a professor. But I burnt out pretty quickly after my master's program. I had one friend that lived in Los Angeles. She invited me out to be in her wedding. I met her boss, who happened to be running a public relations firm in Los Angeles. And he just turned to me and said, we're getting along really well. I need to hire Latinas. I would like to hire you. I'm like, oh, okay. We did a formal interview and I just took a chance. I figured my mom has taken chances and risks for me. I can do this for myself too. So I came to Los Angeles in 1993. It was at the tail end of the 187 campaign that would have taken away rights to undocumented individuals in in California. So I didn't understand at that time when I came to California this difference of immigration patterns. I studied it in Michigan, and Michigan has one of the largest migrant farm worker communities. I understood that very well, but that gave me, when I came here, it was a whole other sense of politics, and I got myself involved right away. And I also was really excited because as I was coming to Los Angeles, there was a mayoral race, and there was a Latina running for mayor, and that was Linda Grego. And I would read about her in the newspapers, and she was like a North Star for me in so many ways of like the opportunities and the possibilities. And so I was very excited when I eventually did get to meet Linda Grego, and now I consider her this incredible mentor, as so many Latinas do. So I did PR for about 5 years. I was good at it. I wasn't great, and it definitely was not my passion. So I just applied blindly to an ad to be a fundraiser at United Way. To me, public relations is very much about sales and marketing, and I thought, well, if I'm doing it for major clients, I can do it for a good cause. And I went in and killed the interview, did a great job, convinced them that even though I never fundraised in my life, that I could do it. And the position was to start doing fundraising within Latino leadership in Los Angeles. And because of that in particular, I was introduced to the Latino board members of United Way, which included one of the founders of Hope. And working with her, the founding president, Maria Ventura Sweet, is how I started volunteering with Hope. And as I started volunteering, I fell in love right away. And you'll hear a lot of Latinas describe their feeling of almost like a homecoming when they go to the first Hope event. It's like they found their people, right? And as these professional and community leaders are often one of the only Latinas in a room, it's quite a feeling to walk into a ballroom where you're surrounded with 500 like-minded Latinas. And so you feel family right away. And I was really missing that. And I loved that feeling when I walked into my first Hope event, so I was happy to start volunteering. From volunteering, I went through one of the Hope Leadership Institute, the Hope Leadership Institute program. When I graduated for that, I applied to be the first full-time executive director and been here for 21 years. Our mission at Hope is to ensure economic and political parity for Latinas. To me, that was an opportunity and continues to be an opportunity to correct the wrongs that I feel my mother faced, the discriminations that she faced. if my mom had half the opportunities that I've been given, she would probably be an engineer or an architect and building high rises all across the United States. She is someone that, with the limited education that she's had, has been able to really save her money, make smart choices, make sure her two daughters went on to college. She's just been incredible. And I always think about all the incredible women that are just maybe one step away from getting their degree, one door away being open to them for possibilities. And that's what I think Hope does. I know that's what Hope does. You know, we advocate to ensure that pathways into education, to workforce, to government are open. And my parents raised me to really love this country's democracy and to participate in it. I still remember watching back in the early 80s, both the Democratic and the Republican, the Democrat and the Republican conventions. So I think the combination of wanting to, just feeling this purpose to serve other Latinas, to make sure other Latinas have possibilities, are realizing their dreams, and then utilizing that to strengthen our country is why I love Hope so much. And it just resonates with who I am, what my DNA is. I think there's no mistake that I work for an organization that advocates for healthcare reform when I was a recipient of public health care. It is no mistake that I work for an organization that's adamant to ensure there's a pathway from public education to higher education when I was the beneficiary of that. And I see that the investments early on can be multiplied for the benefit of our community. So that's why I'm at Hope. It really is, you know, in my DNA. So interesting enough, most people don't believe me when I tell them this. I'm pretty much of an introvert. So if I could, I would spend, I mean, I love my family and I love my boys and my husband, but I'm just always so happy when we're just together watching movies or talking about discussions and kind of our own little bubble, right? But one of the best things that I did for myself was to take risks. So I got, and I learned that from my mother. So I knew that there was something bigger for me than what I was first intentionally thinking of going on to become a professor back at Michigan State, right? I knew there was a calling for me in the Latino community. I'm not sure why, but I just knew it in my gut. And so follow your heart, take some calculated risk, enjoy life. I always say that if you can approach things with a sense of humor, it's so much better than being really kind of rigid about things. And know that different possibilities and opportunities will be presented to you. My goal as a mother is to ensure my boys have as many opportunities presented to them. And I think if we collectively think of that as Latinos and Latinas, how we're creating opportunities for our communities, we're just that much more ahead of the game. But yeah, I would say take risk, have fun, and just approach life with a sense of humor and be ready for the big mystery.
The category of innovation of the Maestro Awards in San Francisco is presented to Laura Catena in 2022. She's a passionate leader, a passionate entrepreneur, researcher, and physician. She is the managing director of Catena Wines, one of the largest wineries in the world and the largest in Argentina. And she has done many, many things to advance her industry and the knowledge of the Malbec grape. So please join me to see the conversation we had with her.
So I was born in Mendoza, Argentina, which is the the mecca of wine in Argentina. It's where 80% of our wines are made. I grew up in a wine family. But in my family, the most important thing was studying at school and being a good student. And this was a legacy from my grandmother, my father's mother, who was the headmistress of the local school. And so I grew up in a very sort of academic environment. There were always books. We would go on trips and go to museums and study history. And academics was the most important thing. Not really wine, which was sort of my father's business. It was what my grandfather did. It was what my great-grandfather had done. And honestly, you know, when people ask me, did I ever think of becoming a winemaker, was the last thought. You know, I wanted to do something that would make a difference in the world. When I was in medical school, my father invited me to go on these trips to France as his translator. So his excuse was that I spoke French. I think what he was trying to do was get me interested in wine in a very subtle way. So I would go to France with him when, you know, I'd already decided to be a doctor. I was just going to help Papa and to taste some good wine. And, you know, your father says, will you come, Laurita, to France with me to taste wine? Of course, you say yes. And I had these wonderful trips to France as my father's translator, which was not that necessary because everybody spoke English and my father speaks English really well. But I started falling in love with wine as a hobby. So this was something that my father and I would share. So he would come visit me in medical school and, you know, I would come home after a night shift. You know, I'd greet my father, I would take my nap and then we'd go out to dinner and we'd have a fantastic wine and we would bond over this and he would tell me what he was doing in Mendoza and I would tell him what I was learning in the hospital and we connected over this. So really I was first a wine consumer. Then what happened actually was that my father came up with this idea to do what Mondavi had done in California and Argentina. You know, Mondavi was challenging the French to make California wines that could stand with the best of the world. And most people in South America were going the Chile way, which was let's make a lot of inexpensive wine, let's flood the market. And Chile was doing really well with their inexpensive wines. And my father said, no, I'm not going to go that way. I am going to go the Mondavi way, which is to put California at the same level as the best French wines. And there was this famous judgment of Paris, which was this blind tasting where the California wines beat the French wines. And, you know, when my father heard about this, he said, you know, this is definitely what I want to try and do. And, you know, if you were to, you know, go back to that time, it was crazy to think he could do that. Nobody knew South America. South America meant nothing in terms of luxury. And, you know, it was crazy, but my father decided to go ahead and do it. And so he had to acquire the technology, study the soil and climate. And, you know, it's not easy to, you know, go from a winery that's making, you know, okay wine, following some traditional methods, to making wines that can compete with the top of the market. The vision of the Catena Institute is to use science to preserve nature and culture. And why nature and culture? Nature because the vineyard exists in an ecosystem. So it exists in an ecosystem with the microbes in the soil, the birds that you know, eat the rodents, that with too many rodents, they eat the roots. So there is this whole ecosystem that's functioning together in order to give you this great wine. There's microbes that help the vines withstand water stress, that create nutrients. There's the cover crops that help the nutrition of the root systems. So this is what I call nature. So this needs to be preserved. And now with climate change, we have to do a lot more research because we have to figure out how to deal with, you know, much more dramatic climate changes. Like we have more frost some years. It's not always hotter. Sometimes we get worse frost. So, you know, it's not just about getting hotter, but it's also about more extremes. The biggest problem we have is water scarcity. So we actually have a PhD student that's working on how to use less water. So, you know, carbon emissions, carbon sequestration. So there's so many things that we need to study to make wine that's up there with the rest of the world. But first we need to, like I said, preserve nature. And then the second word is culture. And this is something that, if you're not in the wine industry, you might not know about this, but we have the same issue that many other industries have, that people are leaving the countryside for the cities because people like the idea of living in a city and having access to all the things that a city provides. But the culture of the countryside and the lifestyle of the countryside is a very good lifestyle. And so the question I ask myself is, how do we make sure that 200 years from now, my wine region is still a wine region? And that seems obvious, but it's not. You know, we've been making wine since the 16th century, but with how rapidly society is changing, it's possible that we wouldn't exist in 200 years. So how do I preserve those traditions, but also make people's lives good enough so that they're better than the city? I don't want people to stay in the countryside because I said so. I want them to stay in the countryside because it's a better life than what the city offers. And in order to figure that out, you have to study it. And I'll tell you one sort of simple example. So I did a survey of people in the countryside. What's most important to you? And everybody wants more money. And so that's very important. You know, you should pay people better than the salary they might get in the city. If you pay them less, they will go to the city, and they're right to do so. But once that is equalized, they all said they like living in the countryside. Most of the people enjoy nature, and you know, we actually give houses to people, so we have hundreds of houses for our employees. That was very important to them. But the next thing was the internet. And we had always thought that people in the countryside didn't want to have great internet because, you know, they've got, I don't know, the beautiful trees, and many of them have horses, and, you know, the kids go to the local school. But if you want your kid to have a shot at a very high level of education, if you want your kid maybe to go and get a PhD in something, they need good internet. You cannot have great schooling today in any part of the world without good internet. One of the problems was that it was very expensive to get good internet in these remote areas, because in Argentina we have kind of monopolies of the internet services. So if you want to put internet in some remote place, you have to put it yourself. So huge expense. But you know, I asked my question, how do I keep these people from going to the city? And that was a determinant factor. And so we went ahead and made this huge investment. You know, and you think, God, you really need internet in this tiny little village where there's, you know, less than 100 people at 5,000 feet elevation? Well, we don't for our business, but that person does. And if I want them to stay there, and they're a highly trained person who knows how to work this vineyard that's so important to us, they want internet. And so what I like about this is when I say to use science, because you don't just do what you feel, you study it, and then you find the solution to the actual problem you have. Yeah, so I'm very passionate about my dog, who has been running around today. I really like being outdoors when I'm in the winery. I like being in the vineyard more than at the winery. I taste some wine, but I can't spend more than about 2 hours tasting the wine. I have to go out to the vineyards. I have a very handsome, fun husband who likes to travel with me. He's also an emergency doctor. There's a big job, 2 jobs until recently, and the 3 children. I always explain to my husband, who is, he's American from the Midwest, that in our culture, the children come first. And so he's waiting for them to all go to school. We still have 1 kid for 1 more year. So I promised him that when all 3 kids go to school, I will pay more attention. Although my friends tell me that when they go to school, they call you and they need you just as much. So we'll see. But anyhow, I love this life of going back and forth, Argentina to the U.S. I've lived in other parts of the world because, you know, sometimes you really have to establish the Argentine category and you have to be there. And so there's been a lot of traveling. I am an expert at, you know, sleeping on planes. You know, I have all my techniques. And I have a lot of fun doing that, and then being out in nature, walking my dog. I mean, for me, my pleasures are simple outside of work. It's and for me, work is fun. So going to the hospital, I mean, it's not fun when people suffer, but helping people. I did a lot of pediatrics, which is wonderful because pretty much, you know, most of the kids, you take them from parents are scared, they're crying, they feel terrible, to they're great. So it's a very rewarding job. So I really enjoyed my life as a doctor, and I'm still volunteering, doing vaccinations. The wine is fun because, you know, people love wine. It's a happy industry. And then, you know, you give me a book and a dog to walk and you know, a good, you know, meal at a nice restaurant, and that's all I need.
The Maestro Award in the category of Ultimate Drive in San Francisco 2022 is being presented to Rafael Magaña, President and CEO of Latino Professionals. He has been not only a very successful professional himself, but also has been advocating for the careers of others like him. Through his organization and the commitment that he has helped and led many successful stories. Join me to see the conversation we had with him.
One of the beautiful things about my parents coming to this country is the idea of wanting to do more. And so my mother came here pregnant with me, and at the time she was in San Diego. And they told my mom and my dad, we can only save one, should we? And so at the time my dad was saying, well, we could always have more children. And at the time my mom had 3 miscarriages. And so she really, being Catholic, she really wanted to, you know what, I need you to do anything. She told the doctor, I need you to do anything you can do to be able to save my son. And so at the time, the doctor recommended was specialist in San Jose, California. And so they helicopter over there. I was born premature and was put in an incubation. I was there for about 6 weeks. And here's a funny story. At the time when they went to pick up the child, they had given my parents a child. They walked out to the parking lot and they said, I don't think this is our son. They went back, and it turned out that they had received an Asian baby, and they apologized, we're so sorry, here's your correct baby. So we always laugh around what would have happened if we would have traded families. But one of the funny things, there's actually articles and research that in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s, there was a if you didn't tag the baby, you might accidentally, there's about 2,000 babies that were actually accidentally given to the wrong family. So a little bit of kind of a funny history. Fast forward, grew up, we settled in Santa Maria, California, Santa Barbara County. Just had a normal middle class childhood with my parents, cousins, family, and aunts. We all lived together, celebrated holidays, came around the table to eat and have large meals. One of the funny things is growing up in a Latino community is food is love, right? So, you know, when you finished one serving, we were given 3 servings. So I went through that. Early on, for me, how I ended up in my career now is I started fundraising for uniforms. So I played soccer, and I remember going to some of the wealthy homes and fundraising and asking for support for our soccer team for our uniforms. And at the time, I had fundraised about $5,000. Well, everybody, the average was about $200 to $300 that they had averaged. And I went to my coach and I said, here's the envelope of the $5,000 that I fundraised. And my coach fell off his seat and said, oh my gosh, I think you have a career in fundraising. And fast forward, that's kind of what I do in my profession. Latino Professionals was really started by a group of women Sarina Motola and Lupe Ochoa who are my right and left hand of starting Latino Professionals. And we were sitting down at a table having dinner, and I said, why don't we start a Latina Professionals organization to really support and address a lot of the challenges that women have. So we all got excited around the table and said, okay, let's create Latina Professionals. And that just has been an organization that has grown with so much passion, so much excitement, and it's taken off by itself. We joke around, Latina Professionals might become bigger than Latino Professionals, but yeah. For me, I think I'm doing what I love on a day-to-day. I get to really build these organizations. I see myself as an engineer, right? What resources are you dealing with, right? The analogy that I love using of what I do is it's almost like, it's kind of full circle, right? That when I was in high school, I thought I was going to go into mechanical engineering, and in a way, I'm doing fundraising engineering. What that means is it's kind of a nuance, right? That In mechanical engineering, you're looking at your resources, you're looking at your budget, you're looking at what you're building. And so as a fundraising engineer or as a kind of building organizations, is you're looking at what resources you have, what are you building? And I like using the bridge analogy. Are you building a bridge out of wood? Are you building a bridge out of steel? Are you building a bridge out of cement? Are you building a bottom suspension? Are you building a top suspension, you know, like the San Francisco Bridge? So what is it that you're building? And are you building that bridge for 10 years? Are you building that bridge for 100 years? Or are you building a bridge for 200 years? And so for us, as we build these organizations, is really looking at the longevity of building these organizations that are gonna outlive me and are gonna continue to do good in our community. We're building incredible young rising Latinos that are very talented, and they have discovered the fabric of working together. You have Latinos that are in banking, real estate, all working together through our organization. And we're, in the future, we'd be really building that superhighway between LA, San Francisco, Washington, DC, some of the big city hubs of Latinos working together, collaborating together, sharing resources, sharing connections, and saying, hey, what is your challenge that you're currently having? I'm going through this. And you can say, you know what? Let me share somebody that can help you and push you forward. And at the same time, being vulnerable to say, hey, I'm currently going through this challenge. Do you know anybody? And I think that kind of exchange of resources, currency, working together is something that we've built with our organizations. And I'd love to see that kind of accelerated well into the future. Many Latinos go to college, you get that degree, and you know, college has told you that with that degree, doors are going to open up, and a lot of us end up hitting that wall. And so how do you overcome those challenges? And I think what I would say to my younger self is lean into your community, talk to your network, talk to your family, talk to somebody about the challenges, and go to other leaders that you admire and reach out to them and say, hey, I'm dealing with this challenge. How did you overcome this challenge? I think those are one of those incredible resources with social media, with LinkedIn, which is an incredible platform to reach out to your top 2-3 leaders and say, really, I really admire you, and I'd love to pick your brain or ask you a question of a challenge that I'm currently having. And what you find is you have these executives that are happy to give back and happy to talk to you and walk you through the options that you have. And I think that's imperative that we have ourselves as leaders in our community. We ourselves have mentors. I think that is truly the success of the evolution, constantly growing, constantly really just executing and overcoming those challenges. I love food. One of the biggest key things, I love food. Love finding restaurants on Yelp, especially the joke my staff always says is, if you want a good restaurant, ask Rafael. And the joke is, I love going to restaurants that are 4.5 rated on Yelp. And I love Korean, Brazilian, Venezuelan, Mexican, Tex-Mex, all kinds of food. I think there's something beautiful about our Latino culture, especially the fusion, right? I was at a restaurant the other day which had Vietnamese, Spanish fusion. And so I thought it was very interesting, and the food that they put together was quite impressive. These kind of multicultural, you're seeing that through food. And so one of the passions of mine is discovering holes in the walls and then sharing it with our staff and friends and family that fly in. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to take you to this incredible restaurant. You're gonna try something you've never had before. So.
This has been the 13th edition of the Maestro Awards in San Francisco. Thank you for being with us. Congratulations to all the awardees, because their leadership, their role model, and their example is something that we will always celebrate. This award is the highest recognition that Latino Leaders Magazine presents. On behalf of my staff, myself, congratulations to all of them. Thank you for being with us, and thank you to our sponsor, Southwest Airlines, for being with us.